Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome in, friends. So glad you're here. We are so grateful that it is springtime and that our bioregional herbalism webinars continue this morning, this afternoon, this evening, today with ashwagandha. And huge welcome to you all. Thank you for taking your time out of your busy lives, out of your bustling spring to join us live. We see you, we love you. And if you're listening to this after the fact, we love you as our recorded families as well. And thank you so much for joining us. If you'd love, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Do share your name and that place you call home. Call it by whatever name you call it. But also, if you know the indigenous lands you occupy, please throw that in the chat as well. And if you've grown ashwagandha before, if you haven't grown ashwagandha before, put in something that you would love to share about ashwagandha, whether it's your first season or 50th season growing it, or a pressing question you may have. We will be letting plenty of time for the Q&A simmer. And if you have clarifying questions, of course, ask away anytime. So I would love to just take this moment to thank Kira Avery, our beloved friend, who's sharing her joy and language justice with ASL interpretation for us. Thank you, Kira. We see you. We love you. And I'd love to share, another thanks for our ancestors, both plant and human, who have made it possible across the millennia for us all to be gathering today. We are part of a long lineage of people and plants co-adapting, co-evolving, healing each other as we heal each other. And thank you for joining. I'd love to begin with these words from John Seuss, a little poem called To Be of the Earth. To be of the earth is to know the restlessness of being a seed, the darkness of being planted, the struggle toward the light, the pain of growth into light, the joy of bursting and bearing fruit, the love of being food for someone, of scattering your seeds, the decay of the seasons, the mystery of death, and the miracle of birth. Wherever you are in these cycles, friends, we join you here this afternoon. And thank you for joining us along the journey as well. So for the rest of our time together, we're going to do some brief intros, Geraldine and I. Then we're just going to dive right into garden planning and sowing and growing ashwagandha, the nitty-gritty how-tos. And then I will share those. And then Geraldine will jump into the medicinal wisdom of these plants and how we can be engaging them with ourselves and our communities. And then we will tell you the herb that we will be exploring together next time. And then we will bid you adieu, but only in body, but not in spirit. So without further ado, Geraldine, tell us about yourself.
Petra, nice to be here. It's so cool to have a room full of folks coming to learn about ashwagandha. Really makes my day to see everybody here and engaging. It's really exciting. If you don't know me, if we don't know each other, my name is Geraldine. I live in Brooktondale, the original stewards of this land, the Haudenosaunee people. And I'm a bioregional herbalist. So that means that I make bioregional products. I make products with the abundant herbs of my area, the herbs I cultivate, the herbs I buy in from farmers down the road. And I love to teach about how to make medicine. Like, sure, I sell some tinctures and skincare and that kind of thing, monthly seasonal boxes online, but I also really get a lot of pleasure out of teaching people how to identify and make really good quality herbal medicines for themselves. And it's such a pleasure to bring that together with Petra's incredible knowledge of how to start these plants and grow them in your garden, and then offer these monthly webinars. So you can check out my company Suntrap, that's Suntrap, or you can just tune in every month for these webinars that we love to offer you.
So beautiful. So beautiful. I can't wait to hug you again one day, Jeremy. And I'm Petra, in case we haven't met. I'm Petra Page Mann, and I grew up in my father's garden right here in the Finger Lakes. I love seeds and growing seeds and sharing seeds. After many years of growing and sharing seeds just in little packets, hand scribbled, my partner and I started and founded Fruition Seeds. And when people ask if we have children, we say yes, and great, great, great grandchildren, and we put them in packets. And so it's our great joy to be sharing not only the seeds, but the actual know how. Because, right, it's easy enough to get seeds, maybe not easy to get organic, truly well adapted for your bioregion seeds, but that still is easier than knowing how to grow them. So it's our great joy to share all of our great joy in growing these seeds, as well as simply sharing them with you. And so, yes, let's dive in. We'll talk a little bit about how to plan your garden so that you can have ashwagandha part of your life. And then also sowing ashwagandha, transplanting, weeding, feeding, some of those growing details, when to harvest. And then I can't wait. I'm going to be taking lots of notes for when Geraldine is talking about the vastness of ashwagandha as an herbal accomplice, an ally, a dear friend. So planning your garden with ashwagandha, just keep in mind, yes, accompanied throughout the seasons. So keep in mind, as you're planning your garden to grow ashwagandha, you want the full season. So whether you're in zone 4, in zone 12, it's a full season scenario. And the longer you have it growing, the more root you will have to harvest. And it's those roots that have those medicinal compounds. So yes, plan on starting it about 4 weeks before final frost, i.e. welcome to the present moment, mid-April, never better, here in zone 5, and plan to be growing it the entire season. And then also plan on it being a warm season crop. Don't try to plant it out before your final frost. This just in, ashwagandha is in the solanid family, the nightshade family, along with tomatoes, peppers, eggplants. So ashwagandha is not only frost sensitive, it's cold sensitive. So it will grow happiest and healthiest if you're planting it out after the nights are in fact in the 50s. So not just after frost, but think like not experiencing 48, your ashwagandha will be that much more healthy and thus abundant. Other things to keep in mind, those beautiful roots that you're about to grow, they grow all the more big and beautiful with nutrients. So don't skimp on fertility. And finally, loose soil, rock-free soil, which I don't know if such a thing exists, certainly here in the Finger Lakes, but the less your ashwagandha has to navigate great big roots, pardon me, rocks, the more it can root and abundantly and freely. So there's some just planning tips for your ashwagandha. So now, when to sow. 4 weeks before final frost is totally your time. And keep in mind that when is final frost? So when is 4 weeks before final frost? Let's talk. Final frost for us here at Fruition, here in zone 5, that's anywhere from mid-April to, honestly, pardon me, mid-May to the beginning of June. It's frosted for us before. So it's a big window. We generally tend to go about 4 weeks before the earliest date because ashwagandha, as you'll soon see, takes her time germinating. So that way she's a little on the smaller side if in fact final frost is really early, and then she's perfectly sized even if it's quite late and you just don't want to have a stressed older ashwagandha seedling to start your season off with. So yes, 4 weeks before your average date of your final frost is perfect. And seeding depth, 1/8 of an inch. General rule, only sow seeds twice as deep as they are. So ashwagandha is this pretty small little seed. So barely sow her. Really common mistake to avoid is just sowing too deep to begin with. And keep in mind, ashwagandha takes her time germinating. Just like a lot of solonids, like peppers, can take a long time to germinate, and in fact, germinate so much better, right? If they're on a heat mat. So if you can sow on a heat mat, so much the better. Your ashwagandha might germinate in 14, 15 days. At 75 degrees, that is the average germination date. If it's 60 degrees, more like room temperature around our house, that takes 25 days average to germinate. So if you have a warm spot, amazing, put your ashwagandha there. Just make sure there's plenty of light. And in the meantime, heat mats go far. We do share them on our website as well. And there's a number of different ways that you can sow ashwagandha. You can sow, my favorite is into soil blocks, accept no imitations. Plants grow so much healthier in soil blocks. And you can also plant them in 6-packs, in yogurt cups, in peat pots and cow pots. I recommend cow pots over peat. Cow manure is just a little more renewable than peat by a lot. But there's lots of different ways that you can be growing these lovely little seedlings. And I will shamelessly direct you to our 15 steps of growing spectacular seedlings. That's part of our Rise and Shine Starting Seeds with Ease book. That is a beautiful paper book. It's also a wonderful and totally free ebook on our website. In our follow-up email, I am going to send this to you as well. And if you're watching after the fact, the opt-in below will send this your way as well, so that it can just set you up for success. And I won't go through all of the nitty gritty details now, because we could spend the next hour talking about how to start transplants well. But ashwagandha, just starting it well as you would start any other 4-week-old transplant in any of your soil blocks, peat pots, cell trays, so much the better. If you have light, wonderful. If you have a great grow light, even better. If your south facing light is growing transplants like this is just a little moment for honesty. You don't have enough really good light to grow really healthy transplants. So erring on that younger side, younger transplants are always more healthy than older stressed transplants, and healthier plants are always more abundant. So yes, even though you might feel like you're starting late, it's better to have a younger transplant compared to an older transplant. And it's getting to the point where you are planting out your ashwagandha, whether it's in a cell tray, soil block, in a peat pot. Once you have 2 sets of true leaves, your ashwagandha is good to go and at a great stage to go outside. And so when you're transplanting, and this isn't just ashwagandha in general, harden off your transplants, friends. Go ahead and leave them outside before transplanting them for 5-7 days so that they're acclimating to life outside instead of your juicy, warm, very consistent temperature, not raining, not breezy kitchen or greenhouse or wherever you may starting your seeds. So yes, that hardening off period is crucial. And there's lots more tips on how to successfully and brilliantly plant out your transplants. Don't skimp on fertility again with those beautiful, with anything, but especially ashwagandha, where you want to be really giving them lots of nutrients to grow lots of big, beautiful roots. And here's the thing, because It's a heat-loving solanid. It's in that solanaceous family with tomatoes. The more, if you can put it in a full sun place, rich, well-drained soil, so much the better. If you can mulch with dark mulches or even grow in a great big container that's dark, any of those additional heat units, they're called, any additional warmth that that plant can experience will just translate into health and happiness and thus more abundant roots. And in the feeding department, there's a lot of different ways to think about how to feed your ashwagandha to promote abundant roots. And first and foremost, just also don't skimp in the potting mix department. Get really rich compost based nutrient dense potting mix. And that is honestly one of the biggest keys to success. It's really easy to skimp and pay a little bit less for way less nutrients in a potting mix. Go ahead and spend a few more dollars. It makes a huge difference. So that's your first way to feed your ashwagandha. And otherwise, when I'm planting into soil, I put just a handful of compost right in that hole with it. Maybe some slow release organic fertilizer like we have on our website. We put it by the ton on our farm, and a little with every single plant. And that care goes a long way. I think of it like if you're growing a full season plant like ashwagandha, like winter squash, like Brussels sprouts, you're sending them on a journey. And if I'm journeying up a mountain, I'm going to take a snack. No, I'm going to take a sandwich. No, I'm going to take 3 sandwiches. So don't skimp on the snacks that you're setting your plants up with early and often. And then, of course, always there's compost tea, also fish emulsion. Every other week, we're spraying compost tea and or fish emulsion on all of our plants, so that ashwagandha included, because health prevention is the best cure, and having all of those micronutrients available for us as well as our plants is the best way to keep them healthy, happy, and thus abundant. Let's talk about containers real quick. I don't love growing ashwagandha in containers only because I want these roots to be able to explore as long, as far, as wide as they want. And in containers, even if it's a great big 15-gallon container, which is the minimum that I recommend to grow ashwagandha in, it's still going to be a thimble of soil compared to the access they would have in your big garden or in a small garden in the ground. So, yes, containers, make sure they're big and really don't mess around. Put in tons of compost and slow release organic fertilizer. Put in a bunch of fertility. When you're planting them out, oh, I didn't mention this. We plant them every 8 to 10 inches, so just less than a foot. They can be a little closer than most solanids because they get much taller and they aren't as wide. And we honestly in between, so it's 8 to 10 inches between row in the row, and between rows it depends honestly on your garden and how you are mulching, how you're weeding. We generally tend to do things on grow rows on 3-foot centers, but that row you can totally adapt it to your garden, and you can also grow them just in a block as well. So other notes to keep in mind: flea beetles. There's lots of different species of flea beetle. And mostly here in the Northeast, we have flea beetles that munch on our brassicas, but there are in fact solanaceous flea beetles that you'll see on your eggplant and on your tomatoes. And they will totally take note that you are growing ashwagandha. And even if you didn't know that ashwagandha was in the solanid family, the solanaceous flea beetles are fully aware. So flea beetles, no big deal. They're just going to make little tiny pock marks in your leaves. So if you notice those little tiny, just like they're almost like little pinpricks, don't worry. It's cosmetic unless they're defoliating a very young plant, which probably won't be the case because solanid flea beetles emerge in midsummer. So yeah, any other things to keep in mind? Yes, let's talk about seed saving real quick, and let's talk about harvesting. So with seed saving, you'll see, since they're in the solanid family, they're little seeds come in these tiny little berries. They're the size of, imagine a grape seed, a large grape seed, or like a grapefruit seed. And they're bright red when they're ready, when they're ripe, and they're encased in this darling husk. If you can imagine a tomatillo or a ground cherry, that papery husk, or Chinese lanterns, that is, yes, in the solanid family as well. And so the ashwagandha seeds are encased in these beautiful green husks that turn gold when they're ripe. And when they're gold, on that husk is gold, that inner berry is bright, beautiful scarlet, and that is full of seeds. And with those, I love to just bring them inside, squish them like this in my hands, and run water over them. Separate the water, separates the seed from the fruit effortlessly. Rinse them really well, dry them, label them, share them abundantly, because when you're starting to save ashwagandha seeds, you'll quickly find you're only going to be able to share them. There's no way to grow all the seeds that they produce. They are so generous with so much more than their incredible compounds. And they're healing in so many ways beyond those compounds in our bodies. Those seeds are also here to heal us all. And harvesting, I love, so you can harvest ashwagandha anytime after frost. The frost is going to kill that ashwagandha without question. And then honestly, I don't know, and I'm curious to ask you, Geraldine, if there's any benefit in letting them kind of sit there and maybe start to die back or go dormant. I was taught to harvest them as quickly as possible, but to be totally honest, it's generally Petra realizing it's snowing, it's about to snow 4 inches. I really have to harvest this ashwagandha. Don't mess around anymore. And to be honest, when I'm digging them up, I don't see any damage in the roots. I don't see any, like, often if things are wet and cold, that like rot starts to set in. I've never had that experience with ashwagandha. So no, you can harvest it, yes, right after frost. Fabulous. But also if it's like 6, 7 weeks later and it's about to actually, you're like waxing your skis, but the ground isn't totally frozen, that's also perfectly valid. So yes, ashwagandha, some sowing and growing tips for you, friends. And Geraldine, I am so excited to take some notes on how we can use these compounds in our lives.
Well, thank you so much for that, Petra. And first of all, I do think that leaving the roots in the ground is probably fine. My understanding has also been to harvest them after the frost, but then I tend to think about the ground as the most wonderful refrigerator for whatever roots I may be harvesting in the autumn, be they marshmallow or elecampane. I'm like 2 herbs that I think we've done in this series, by the way, cool. But or ashwagandha, same thing. So, and cool, I haven't noticed them rotting in the ground, and I've definitely been late on harvests. And also, thanks for your note about hardening off seedlings. I'm definitely going to try to do that more. I'm going to try to do a better job hardening off my seedlings this year. Thanks for the inspo. So let us talk a little bit about the medicine of ashwagandha. There's a lot to talk about here, and I might hop around a little. So if you have any questions whatsoever, just hop in that chat, and we will certainly be getting to all of your questions by the end of this class. We're going to leave time for the Q&A. So you might have already picked this up, but the root is the primary medicinal part that we use. We dig those roots, like Petra said, after the frost. There are a couple cases where people have used the leaf for medicine, and I will briefly discuss that, but it's actually not a medicine I've used. I've only read about using the leaf, whereas I've used the root plenty. So the taste and energy of the ashwagandha root is bitter, warm, and dry. It's native to the drier subtropics of India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and parts of Africa. And all of those places have unique usages for ashwagandha, which I'll talk about. And some of them are very similar to the way I use ashwagandha and the way I learned how to work with this root in traditional Western herbalism, which is what I have studied. And some of them are so different, which to me is so interesting and amazing. I can't wait to give you those notes. So some properties of ashwagandha is, first of all, this is like one of the more recent poster childs for the category of adaptogen. So you might have heard this term before. It's like a very popular term, adaptogen. It's basically a category of herbs that not only help you empty out your stress bucket, but they also help give you a bigger, stronger stress bucket, like helping you hold on and deal with the stresses of life. They strengthening to the whole system. The definition of an adaptogen is an herb that's non-toxic, really, in like pretty much any reasonable dose. You can be taking it every day. Excuse me. More of a food as medicine herb, and they tend to have a non-specific positive impact on most of our body systems, which is so cool. It's like a generally strengthening herb. And so if like, you're having trouble in one area, it might help balance that out. If somebody else is, maybe their circulation isn't so good, it might be helping balance that out. So that can end up resulting in these adaptogenic herbs having an unbelievable laundry list of so-called properties. And I think if you ever are reading herbal literature and you see that, you might think, oh, this might be like a nourishing, balancing herb that's going to have different effects on people depending on what they're deficient in. And I think ashwagandha is a really good example of that. And in my personal practice, ashwagandha comes to the front of my mind when I think of any kind of like strengthening being needed, like if somebody is recovering from an illness, like recuperation, ashwagandha is first thing I'm thinking of. In a more extreme case, if somebody is recovering from malnutrition or um, like a long-term chronic illness, ashwagandha can be really helpful in building back up what's the word I'm looking for, like building back up the reserves. I also like to think about ashwagandha where there's like nervous insomnia, like if you can't sleep at night and it's ending up being this vicious cycle where it's like you can't sleep and then you're not able to show up during the day. Ashwagandha can be a really helpful nervine calming herb. It's like most of the adaptogens that we have in our apothecary are stimulating. So ashwagandha is a little different in that it's calming. It has these really strong nervine properties. So I wrote this. I don't know if you read my introduction to ashwagandha. I posted it on social media as a teaser, but basically I said the name ashwagandha derives from a Sanskrit word meaning horse scent. And so some people speculate that that's interpreted as horse essence, since ashwagandha is said to give the strength of a stallion. Other people say that is a reference to the way that the root smells, the odor of the roots. And then the Latin species name, somnifera, indicates ashwagandha's usefulness as a sleep-inducing herb. Not to say it's valerian or something where you take it and get drowsy, but it is associated with sleep disorders like insomnia. Like this is an herb that you would want to give somebody or take yourself if you're experiencing sleeplessness over and over again. And I pointed out the contradiction of, hey, this is an herb that gives you the strength of a stallion, but it also is said to induce sleepiness. So how is that possible? Well, it's possible because, when we're going full steam ahead and we're burning the candle at both ends, we're going to need to sleep in order to have that full strength again. So maybe that's pretty obvious, but I just like the way that works. Like you need this herb. This herb will make you strong by calming you down and helping you sleep and like making your calm nervous system, your parasympathetic, replete again. Oh, I also want to just pop in here. I told you I was going to jump around. I'm popping in here with some contraindications. So this would be like warnings about an herb. So avoid using this herb if you have sensitivities to plants in the nightshade family, like the Solanaceae family, like Petra said. So, some people, tomatoes and peppers are really irritating for them. Ashwagandha might be will likely be irritating for you as well if that's the case. Also, do not use the powder, like the powdered herb is just stronger. So don't use the powdered herb internally if you have hemochromatosis, which is an excess iron. It's like a rare condition, but like I'll talk about in a second, ashwagandha is really iron rich herb. So if you already really high levels of iron, you're not going to want to take it. And here's an interesting thing. So generally, I say avoid ashwagandha in pregnancy. There's just not enough data. I always just want people to stay as safe as possible. And so the herb is regularly used in India, certain areas of India, with like for pregnancy, specifically for pregnancy. But in other areas, especially in Africa, it's actually used as an abortifacient, like an herb to induce abortion. So that happens sometimes when you study herbal history. It's like the same herb in one region being used for like a healthy pregnancy, and then in another region, it's being used to abort a pregnancy. And what that means to me is like, okay, these people are using different maybe parts of the herb, different dosages of the herb, but I don't know. So just better like stick to safety there. You know, we just generally we just don't want to mess with it in pregnancy. Okay, so just wanted to get a little contraindication. Oh, and I'm looking at my notes. I have one more, and that is ashwagandha can enhance or increase the effect of barbiturates. So, you know, herbs are strong. Herbs are wonderful, chemical rich substances that we're pulling into our body, and they can affect our chemical constituents and the chemical constituents of other things we're putting in our body. So sometimes it's just nice to know. And I'm glad I got that in there real quick. And so I mentioned the iron rich properties of ashwagandha. So let's talk about that. Ashwagandha can be used to treat iron rich anemia when taken as a part of a regular protocol. So, like every day. And I tend to take it with like coconut milk and honey. And that's also a traditional preparation. But basically, like women are 7 to 10 times more likely to develop anemia and can benefit from this herb for that reason. And ashwagandha, because of its other properties as a nervine, like a relaxing herb, can also soothe perimenopausal symptoms such as muscle pain or brain fog. So this herb is such an ally for women. Um, and then it's also like if you look at like the history of ashwagandha, the way it's used in different cultures is so interesting. So it's we see as like this iron rich herb that helps with brain fog, and like I'm like, oh, such a good, wonderful ally for women. And then let me read you this. I don't have the exact quote, but basically in certain regions of India, ashwagandha is regarded as this like male tonic for like low sperm count, for like just like let's see, for enhancing vigor and sexual prowess. In addition to those recuperative properties, it has like yeah, it's seen as like a male tonic in some cultures and a female tonic in other cultures. And I just, to me, that speaks to ashwagandha's wide general therapeutic benefit and different like cultural uses for the herb. And that Punjab, it's commonly used for lower back pain and as an aphrodisiac. In the Sindh region, it's believed to cause abortion. Um, and then this is also, oh, so in Pakistan, practitioners of Unani Tib use ashwagandha for debility, to prevent osteoporosis, to treat muscle wasting, and improve weakness from heavy menstrual bleeding. Um, also, also in like the Unani Tib tradition, it's used to during like convalescence from a serious illness. When I read that, I'm like, ooh, that kind of sounds like the most similar to how I use herbal medicine. I wonder if like the Unami Tib tradition of Pakistan is like where my teachers learned how to use or how to use ashwagandha, because that is generally how I think of it, as this like really calming nervine herb that has this deeply recuperative property. Ooh, what I haven't even, another thing I haven't mentioned yet. There's so much about ashwagandha. It's like it has so many of these like really specific health properties. So ashwagandha enhances endocrine function and is generally helpful to re-regulate the thyroid. So few herbs have direct effect on thyroid function, but clinical studies show ashwagandha stimulates the thyroid, making it useful for hypothyroidism. So I studied herbal medicine with different mentors and from books, from experience growing plants, but also from working in a clinic in North Carolina. And my teacher, Thomas Easley, at the Eclectic School of Herbal Medicine, loved ashwagandha and specifically always thought about it as the herb for folks, most often women, work dealing with hypothyroidism. So, just to quote Thomas Easley, my teacher, in his book, The Modern Herbal Dispensatory, ashwagandha helps to boost the conversion of T4, which is the thyroid storage hormone, to T3, which is the active thyroid hormone, which makes it an herbal ally for people with hypothyroidism. Um, but you also have to be careful there because sometimes with hypothyroidism comes food sensitivities. So if you have the food sensitivity towards the nightshade family, that would be a contraindication for you. But it's pretty cool that we have an herb that has this like direct effect on the thyroid. And it's also said to have like the direct effect on the thyroid and the testes and the adrenal gland. And that makes sense, the testes, because in I'm not sure exactly where in India, but I know in Ayurvedic medicine, which is the traditional medicine system in India, ashwagandha is prescribed with milk and honey to treat low sperm count in men to help like raise the sperm count. Really interesting. That kind of makes me think about dosage. So like how are we making medicine with ashwagandha and taking it? There's quite a few ways that you can do it. You can tincture the herb. I think Petra showed us her tincture, her beautiful ashwagandha root tincture. So you can certainly tincture that root fresh or dried. If I'm tincturing the fresh root, I think I'm using a ratio of one like fresh root to menstruum, 1 to 2. I'm talking weight here. If I'm working with a dried root, I'm doing a ratio of 1 to 5. And my menstruum, if I'm doing the fresh root, it's going to be as alcohol rich as possible, like because the root already has quite a bit of water in it. So I'm just adding alcohol, blending it up, making a wonderful maceration. If I'm working with a dried root, I'm making sure that I have water in there as well as alcohol. So something more like vodka that you would get off, like something 40 to 60%, any like alcohol, really, that's 40 to 60% is going to be great. The way that I most often think about taking ashwagandha is as a decoction. So people are always talking about ashwagandha having this really intense scent. I have my thing my big jar right here. I love the scent, and to me, it smells like cocoa. And so I'm always nodding when I'm hearing people talk, or I'm reading a book that says ashwagandha smells like horse. I've even heard it said it smells like horse pee. This is in herbal literature. To me, I smell ashwagandha and I think it smells like cocoa. And one of my favorite ways to take it is to grind up the root into a powder, like as soon as I freshly dry it, because in my experience, it gets very hard very quickly. So as soon as I dry it, I'm powdering it for later use, like all through the season. And I really like mixing it with cacao powder and drinking ashwagandha cocoa all winter. It's like my number one hot cocoa that I'm drinking almost like, I love it. I'll also add dandelion root, like a little powdered ginger. Ashwagandha cocoa is like my favorite. And when I look at some traditional preparations, a lot of people are decocting it. So decocting means that you take the root, you put it in a liquid, usually water, and then you boil it. You bring it to a boil and you keep it simmering for like 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. This is the traditional preparation for ashwagandha. So you decocted it, you added it with water on the stove, brought it to a boil, let it simmer, and then you let it steep for like 30 minutes, and it's really strong. Ashwagandha, people, like when I read the literature, people decoct it in milk. And apparently there's something about the fat content that really helps, like something in ashwagandha is really well extracted in fat. So I don't like, for some reason, like milk doesn't sit right with me. So I typically use coconut milk or like whatever nut milk I have around. And I decoct it in that. And like I really can taste the difference between like when I decoct it in water and when I decoct it in milk. I feel like there's something else there. And so if you're like having trouble sleeping or you're feeling like exhausted, a really nice way to work with ashwagandha would be to make it into like a warming beverage before, like 2 hours before you go to bed. Make a nice decoction, add some like cinnamon, ginger, maybe like add a little honey too, like at the end, once you strain it and you're getting ready to drink it, a little maple syrup or honey, just a little bit. It tastes so good. It's like honestly better than hot cocoa, in my opinion. And if you wanted to add hot cocoa, do that, but not before bed, right? Caffeine. But yeah, that's the traditional way, and it's an herb that's wonderful to take every day. I don't know if I mentioned that, but like there are certain herbs that you might only want to take when you're having an acute symptom or for like a short period of time. Ashwagandha is ready to just hang with you long term and just like be your ally, strengthening your system, non-toxic, non-specific, just like helping you wherever you are deficient. I'm gonna look through my notes and see if I'm missing anything that I want to talk about. Um, okay, so just a note that I haven't done this, but the leaves have been applied topically to heal boils and to dispel intestinal worms. I've actually heard that a few times, specifically the intestinal worms. Like I've heard from other practitioners, like that they have used ashwagandha in this way, and that it's effective. It's like, to me, I'm like, wow, amazing. Haven't tried it. Don't have personal experience with it, but it's worth knowing that those above ground parts, those leaves, hold medicinal properties as well. I've always wondered about the berries. Like Petra was describing those like beautiful, rich red berries. I'm like, what properties do they have? I don't know, but I've spent most of my time just hanging out with that root. So,
I confess because I do kind of put most things in my mouth. And because ground cherries are really excellent to put in one's mouth. And there's plenty of other things in the nightshade family that should not go in mouths. I'm sure if it does have medicinal properties, it's like on the like homeopathic level because I definitely put it in my mouth and I was like, I'm taking this immediately out of my mouth. Again, just my experience.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. One more use, like about the leaf juice, the Maasai in Africa use the leaf juice to treat conjunctivitis. So just another interesting tidbit, like keep that in your head. Next time you get pink eye and you have ashwagandha in the garden, maybe juice that leaf and, couldn't hurt, couldn't hurt. Um, yeah. So I think that's about like it for my notes, and I would love to look through these questions now.
Yay! There's so many wonderful questions. And Geraldine, I've got it from the top and we'll move back to the bottom. I see, would it be helpful? Would ashwagandha be helpful for ADHD?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I tend like from like my experience in my herbal studies, there are I would look to Schizandra and Hawthorn, which have some similar properties to ADHD to ashwagandha. Like Schizandra is also classified as an adaptogen, and Hawthorn is like kind of an energetic adaptogen for the heart. But I would look to those two herbs first. I'm not sure. Like maybe ashwagandha would be specific to the situation you have in mind, but I might check out Schizandra first.
Awesome. And I see a wonderful question of, can I access past talks? And thanks for a few other folks jumping in saying, yes, they're on our website. And so to clarify, that's at fruitionseeds.com under learn. And you'll see our recorded webinars. And there's a whole lovely page dedicated to our beautiful bioregional herbalism series. And oh my gosh, there are more questions, and I'm so grateful. Deep-rooted gratitude for this presentation and all the magic that you kindle. What a beautiful way to say thank you. And oh, sending love from the Hudson Valley, yes, and California and Lockport, Ohio, so awesome. Yes, Southern Maine, I love this. And I grew ashwagandha last year, loved the plant. I kept watering, wanting to eat the leaf, but didn't because it's a nightshade. And after Googling and sitting with it, I made honey infusion with the leaf and just love it. So I made just a very small amount, like a tablespoon or less. Ariel, that's amazing. And then Ariel has a question. I ended up tincturing the root fresh and then read you shouldn't use the fresh root, only dry. Do you know what the issue of fresh versus dry is? Awesome question. I don't have any thoughts. I've always just tinctured it fresh because, like Geraldine mentioned, as soon as it gets dry, it's like leather is easier to cut than these roots. They are like solid wood. And honestly, tincturing the fresh root, our poor Vitamix is just like so unimpressed with me. Although she should be used to it by now. Like, this is what you signed up for, coming into my house. But Geraldine, do you have any additional thoughts?
I have not heard that. I wonder, like, if it's something about like the dried root being more concentrated, and maybe even just the dried root being more typical in commerce, because like a lot of the traditional uses are like decocting it. So maybe that's what that references to. I haven't heard of not using ashwagandha fresh.
Mm. Oh, how cool.
Mm.
Linda asked, how high does ashwagandha grow? It only grows about 3 feet tall. So it'll be a little taller in super nutrient dense, rich soil. It'll be a little shorter if you're growing in a container or in not as rich soil. And another awesome question. I saved a bunch of the berries of my ashwagandha last year. Yes. And is there any special treatment the seed needs to germinate well? And an interesting side note, I popped the berries in a paper envelope and it looks like the oil has seeped into the paper. Geraldine is an incredible botanical dye muse also. Geraldine, maybe there's some ashwagandha dye that we can collaborate with. Let's talk. um, but as an aside, there's honestly nothing special in the special treatment department with saving ashwagandha seed. You don't need to do any fermentation or cold stratification. It's just good to go. The only thing is you want to make sure that those berries are truly ripe. And so red is one indicator. Also, they'll start to get soft. So once they are soft and red, you can be really confident that those seeds inside are totally vigorous, have everything they need from their mother plant to be, moving on and being the next generation. So if you harvest them too early, they won't have everything they need to be the next generation. But as long as they're bright red and soft, you should be good to go. And I can imagine the color on that envelope, that seed envelope, and I wonder if it's as bright, and that's so cool. Oh, and Geraldine, here's a great question for you. Leah asks, can you break down the drying and grinding process for the hot cocoa? Do you use powder or a chunk of the root?
Mm.
I want to know too.
That's a great question. And so there's two ways I can answer it. One way, if you want to dry it and powder it, basically freshly dry it, as soon as you dig it or get it in from a grower, chop it up, put it on like, if you can get it fresh and chop it up when it's fresh and then put it on your dehydrator, that would be the best case scenario. So you get it dehydrated. As soon as it's brittle and dry, you want to throw it in your pour Vitamix or whatever high powered blender you have, and just, high power all the way. Maybe wear some earplugs, like really like some ear protection because it is loud. But do your best, powder it to the best of your abilities. If you're somebody who has a mill, run that dried root through the mill. I wish I had a mill for powdering herbs. But you could certainly do that. And so I by all means necessary, which is for me just powdering in my Vitamix as much as possible. I powder that root and then I make big batches. Like I'll fill up something this big with like this much ashwagandha powder, like as much, like so much, and then I'll add lots of cocoa powder. And then I'm like such a food as medicine person sometimes. Like in the kitchen, I love being like, I really feel like I need ginger and cinnamon and like adding that in. Or, oh, like I'm really feeling cardamom. So I'll basically make like an intuitive hot cocoa mix. That's what I do. But another way that you don't have to do that, another way you could do it is say you just have the chunks of ashwagandha. Maybe that's how you bought the herb. Maybe like you don't have a Vitamix. Whatever reason, you just have the chunks, you can still totally make the hot cocoa. Here's what you would do in that case. Basically, just make the decoction in milk, strain it out. So, and just as a reminder, that would be adding those chunks of herb to the water or like the milk or milk substitute, bringing it to a boil, simmering it for 15 minutes or so, straining it. And at that point, add your cacao, add your cinnamon, add your ginger, whatever fixings you like, the honey, and stir it. And that's how you can have a hot cocoa. Versus the powdered one that I described before, that's pretty much ready to go. You can just like put it in the warm, you can put it in the milk and the water and simmer it the same, but you can see how that would be just immediately giving you hot cocoa. So both work.
Woo, yes, beautiful. Oh, we have a clarifying question. Will you please be sure to speak to the use of dry, fresh ashwagandha root when tincture making?
What do you mean to the like how to tincture? Is that the question?
Or yeah. Oh, would you mind asking the question again with some deeper? I think yeah, maybe making sure I have read before that you should only use dry ashwagandha root when tincturing.
Hmm.
And Geraldine, you were saying that you can use it fresh or dry. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure why.
Yeah,
That yeah, yeah, there's as many ways to garden as there are people, and there's as many ways to approach herbal medicine as there are herbalists, which we are all herbalists.
yeah.
So, but certainly, yeah, Geraldine and I tincture fresh ashwagandha root. And Geraldine had mentioned earlier too about, and maybe you can describe this more, if you're using fresh root versus dry root, that depends on the alcohol that you would add. The menstruum is a little different. So there's, of course, in a fresh root, there is a lot more water content than in a dried root. So you can use a higher alcohol content.
Mhm.
Um, Anything you'd love to add to that, Geraldine?
Yes. So I typically don't tincture my ashwagandha. Like for me, in my herbal practice, it is um, I almost always use it as a decoction. So that's like a dried herb being served as like a tea. You're boiling it, serving it as tea. That's how I use ashwagandha. I just looked up one of my teacher, Thomas Easley. I just checked his modern herbal dispensatory. I have a PDF of it as we're talking to look at his medicine making, since he's like a loves ashwagandha, uses it in clinical practice, and he does have a note that says tincturing with the dried root is preferable. And I'm not sure if that is because it's more concentrated when it's dried. That's like a possibility. But I like thank you for bringing that question because I don't always know the answer. What I know is what I have experienced and studied, and so I'm a big ashwagandha decoctor, um, and it looks like maybe it is preferable to work with the dried root. So thanks for bringing that up, folks in the comments, and teaching me something about herbal medicine. So grateful.
And here's another clarifying question. Is it the woody part of the of the root, the active part, or is it primarily the bark and the smaller roots? I have no idea. What do you think, Geraldine?
Yeah, I think because like I have only grown ashwagandha as a um temperate like annual. I have never run into the problem of like my roots being too woody or like too like like the way that I process ashwagandha is like I'm holding the root that Petra's holding, and I just use my Felcos, I use my pruners, and I chop it up into manageable little coins, and then I dehydrate it. So I use the whole root up until like once I get to the crown and I'm like, I can no longer find pieces of ashwagandha. That's when I stop. But yeah, basically the fresh root, it's easy to chop. That's I just like chop it, dehydrate it, and then it's like ready to go if I want to powder it or if I just wanted to decoct it.
Yeah, when I tincture it, and I don't know anything about this, I just tincture the whole thing. Good, bad, not good, not good. So I'm really excited to do some more homework on that too. I hear you, Geraldine, and I suspect in our short seasons, the surface area of these roots is predominantly surface area
Yeah,
rather than
totally.
woody inner material. And
Um,
Nicole, such an important question. Wondering if there's an alternative to using alcohol if you can't drink or use it. Yes. Geraldine, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah. So, well, I'll first say for anybody out there wanting to tincture and you want to use that dried root, use the dried root ratio. So that's like 1 part ashwagandha root, 5 parts, 70% alcohol. I just double checked in like my medicine making booklet from Thomas Easley. And he suggests 70% alcohol being like the sweet spot for tincturing ashwagandha using the dried root. I'll repeat that just slowly. 1 part ashwagandha root, 5 parts menstruum. So say you have like 100 grams of dried ashwagandha roots, you're going to tincture that in 500 milliliters of 70% alcohol. That would be the ideal tincture ratio. And in that case, you're going to take, just for anybody wondering, you're going to take, let me look up the exact dosage for you. 1 second. You're going to take that 1 to 10 milliliters. That's quite a bit. So like 1 dropperful to 10 dropperfuls up to 3 times daily. So for all of you thinking about tinctures, but then onto the question, could you tincture with glycerin or vinegar? Here's the thing. I don't know. Like I really like all herbalists have different expertise and like I think like you could look up I would look up first and see if there are other people. I never work with glycerin, and I do work with vinegar, but I haven't infused ashwagandha in it because like for me like I can only teach what I have experience in, and my primary experience with ashwagandha is using it as a dried herb in preparations, and I think it has so much medicinal activity in that way. So like I'm just going to recommend what has worked for me. But oh yeah, strictly medicinal. Somebody just put in the comments another great medicine making resource, and Rich Ochek from Strictly Medicinal Seeds has a great book, Making Plant Medicine, and it looks like they linked Making Plant Medicine, the book. Great.
I live on the other side of the valley across from Richo. So
Oh,
fun little facts. 2006 to 2007, he is so amazing. And what a beautiful farm and human and family and business. And yeah, I think if you're looking to not use alcohol, and certainly glycerites and like glycerin tinctures are delicious, but oh my gosh, Geraldine, you've totally transformed I take ashwagandha tincture and alcohol-based tincture every day right before bed. But I'm so excited about this decoction and cocoa situation. And so it sounds like there's so many ways to, I love this, use this food as medicine. Medicine is food. And so I'm really grateful that more than perhaps a lot of other medicines and herbal medicines, there are so many ways to enjoy ashwagandha in our lives. without alcohol or anything like a tincture. And I also would love to lift up that I made this tincture probably in November, just before the snow really started to accumulate. And so generally, 4 or 5, 6 weeks is a great time to, strain your tincture. You can do the math. It will sit there and wait for you. So just know that if it's taking you longer to strain your tinctures or do anything else with any of your herbal friends, you're not alone. And that medicine is waiting for you. And part of that medicine is the patience and love that we can give ourselves and each other. Well, friends, it's 5 o'clock, and I just would love to thank Kira Avery so much for sharing so much ASL interpretation for the last hour. Heavens, we love you, Kira. And thank you all who are joining us live. Thank you, everyone who will be joining us in the replay. Geraldine, I love you.
Thank you. I love you too, Petra.
And I love to read this poem once more before we all disappear. A few words from John Seuss. Oh, and wait a minute. Next month, we're going to talk yarrow. Okay. It's going to be great. See you then. So yes, To Be of the Earth by John Seuss. To be of the earth is to know the restlessness of being a seed, the darkness of being planted, the struggle toward the light, and the pain of growth into light, the joy of bursting forth and bearing fruit, the love of being food for someone, the scattering of your seeds, the decay of the seasons, the mystery of death, and the miracle of birth. Sending love to you all as you are sowing seeds, as you are growing seeds, as you are growing yourselves. And thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait till next time. And if you would please, please, please come off mute and just say goodbye. Thank you. We love you. We will join you in saying goodbye. Thank you. We love you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next time.
So fun.